Hello there everyone, welcome back to my channel Fanfiction podcast. Today we will continue our journey of What If Dragonborn Came to Orario Part 7. Before we start, please like, share, subscribe and comment in the comment section. Chapter 49. AON, here we go. I think people will be happy with this one, but I won't spoil anything. I'll just say I hope you like and to please leave a comment or a review with your thoughts and opinions at the end of the chapter. Oh, thank you all for pointing out my continuity error with Aisha. I'll be honest, that was just a goof because I was writing that segment on the road and away from my notes. I forgot I'd made her level 5. I've gone back and edited the chapter to correct it. So if you'd like to reread those segments, feel free to. Hearthfire. Chapter 49. Bell. Bell kicked off the cavern wall, thrusting out with his right hand, held within his firm grip. The Hestia knife carved cleanly through the neck of the Minotaur, causing a shower of blood and monster dust as the creature exploded. The loss of momentum caused by contact with the monster forced the white-haired adventurer to slow and drop from the air onto the stone floor. Instincts drilled into him by his master flared, causing the young captain to spin in place the instant his feet touched the solid surface of the dungeon, hand alight. The firebolt spell soared from his outstretched left hand, incinerating a nearby Almirage, but still he did not slow down. Drawing his offhand dagger, Bell launched it into the skull of a Ligafang and then quickly scooped it up from where it lay in the dust of the exploded monster. Sheathing his weapons, he looked towards Ais. The beautiful blonde warrior princess offered him a small smile from where she stood, amongst the considerably larger than his pile of monster dust she'd created during their recent encounter. With a simple nod to each other, they both bent down to begin collecting the magic stones and drop items left behind by the slain creatures. The two adventurers had spent the better part of the day taking a rather leisurely stroll down from the entrance to where they now stood on the 16th floor, not far from the stairs to Goliath's boss room. Bell was honestly loving it. Just him and AIS adventuring together was a bit of a dream come true. Your improvement really is astounding, Bell. AIS said in her usual quiet voice. I know that. My own has skyrocketed since I started working with Torhen, but yours is a little ridiculous. Oh. Bell blushed and rubbed the back of his head. Thank you, AIS. Master Torhen says. I'm just bringing out my potential, but even I'm not sure why I'm improving so fast. I know it isn't normal. AIS tilted her head to look at him, causing her blonde hair to fall across her face. Bell blushed even harder and looked away. It's not normal for most people, but maybe it's just normal for you. Some people do improve faster than others, after all. That makes as much sense as any other explanation I've been able to come up with. Bell replied, shrugging his shoulders both in a gesture of uncertainty and to readjust his pack. If he was being honest with himself, Bell didn't really care why he was improving so fast. All it meant was that he might achieve his goal of catching up to AIS faster than he expected. That was all he wanted, really. Well, of course he wanted to see his Familia succeed, but his more personal drive was to catch up to her, both so that he could repay her for saving his life, and so that he could prove himself worthy when he confessed his feelings to her. Bell's grandfather would have been exceedingly proud of him for being in a Familia, surrounded by such beautiful women, while also being broken-heartedly disappointed that he wasn't pursuing all of them at once. If he was honest with himself, there wasn't a single woman in his Familia that Bell wouldn't describe as gorgeous at minimum. Though their beauty was different, Bell honestly felt that every woman he knew was beautiful in their own unique way. It was just that, to his mind, AIS stood a full head and shoulders above the rest. She was beautiful, powerful, kind, and he was hopelessly in love with her. Let's go, AIS said, walking towards the stairs. Bell nodded and followed along behind her. It didn't take them long to descend to 17 and cross the empty boss room. The wall of grief stood intimidatingly to their left, but there was no Goliath there to stop them, so they continued on through the empty room and down the stairs once more. Emerging out onto the 18th floor, Bell breathed a sigh of relief and let himself relax a little. Not completely, of course. Master Torhen taught him to never completely relax or let his guard down anywhere but his own home. Considering the hellscape that the 18th became on his first visit, Bell saw the wisdom in not dropping his guard while there. Shielding his eyes, Bell looked up to the crystal ceiling. The large crystals showed no signs that they'd once shattered into a million pieces and unleashed colossal monster Rexes onto the safe zone of 18. Looking down, he grinned at the sight of the rebuilt Riviera. The town was still its shabby self, but significantly better organized than it was before the battle. "Are we staying in the town?" Bell asked AIS as the two descended down the slope towards the village. "Why not?" AIS replied. "It's expensive, but we won't be here long. We can afford one night, without any problems." That was true. Bell wasn't nearly as wealthy as AIS was personally, but their familiars were comparable in terms of wealth thanks to Torhen and goddess Hestia's investments. That's not to say that Bell was poor, of course. He could afford to spend a few nights in the town without having to worry about the cost. It was just a bit of a hassle having to bring money with him down into the dungeon. Most people who came to 18 and didn't intend to stay there for long didn't bother bringing any cash at all. Instead, they'd barter monster drops and crystals they picked up along the way for anything they absolutely needed and would just camp in the woods during their stay. While this was technically the case for them, there was nothing wrong with treating themselves. The vast majority of the buildings were ramshackle, but Riviera prided itself on its inns, and they were always better than camping if you could afford it. Well. The gruff voice of Boz called over to them not long after the pair entered the town. "Didn't expect to see you two down here together. Where's the rest of your group?" "It's him." Bell swallowed nervously. "Just us." Boz raised an eyebrow, his one eye giving them a suspicious look. "That a fact? Well, you've certainly got interesting timing. Follow me. We need to talk." Bell shared a confused look with AIS before following the gruff, one-eyed man deeper into the village. Naza stood with her back against the wall of the hospital's surgical waiting room, eyeing the people inside as the door swung open. Stepping out, with his surgical gown splattered with blood, was Tony Chopper, a young Paolum man and of her familiar's surgeons. "Dr. Chopper." An elderly human woman gasped, rushing towards him from her chair. A group of adventurers who'd been sitting with her also stood, eager to hear from him. "Is my son all right?" Chopper sighed and pulled his surgical cap off his light brown hair. "He'll live," the doctor announced, much to the relief of those waiting. What about his leg?" A hesitant voice spoke up, belonging to a Cianthrope boy. The partner or boyfriend of the young man in surgery. The adventurer in question was brought to them because of a bad encounter with minotaurs on the 15th floor and was unfortunately brought in missing his left leg. Chopper and Naza both grimaced. "I'm afraid there's nothing we can do," Chopper told the dismayed group. "If you'd been able to retrieve the leg, we might have been able to reattach it. But since it was lost, there's not much we can do." "Damn it," the Cianthrope cursed, slamming his fist into a nearby table, tears leaking from his eyes. The patient's mother walked over and started to rub his shoulders, letting her own tears fall. "Does this mean he has to quit adventuring?" one of the other gathered people asked. They were all members of the Typo Familia, a relatively small one with less than a dozen members. The man now missing his leg was their vice captain. "Not necessarily," Chopper replied, locking eyes with Naza. "Captain." The group turned to look at her, with nearly all of them focusing instantly on her golden prosthetic arm. Looking at the group, the usually quiet Cianthrope captain locked eyes with the patient's mother, speaking to her directly. "If your son agrees to it," she started, "we can begin fitting him for a prosthetic. It won't be the same as his original leg, but I guarantee that it will function perfectly well. We can't afford anything so expensive," the woman replied. "I've heard prosthetics like that can bankrupt entire familia. If they were made by Dien sect, they would," Naza replied. "But this is the Mayak Familia. We're in the business of healing people, not bankrupting them. We're more than happy to work out a payment you can afford without issue. Getting your son back to a healthy condition and back on his feet, so to speak, is far more important." All right," she agreed, after a moment of hesitation. "If that's what he wants, then we can figure something out. He should be awake in around an hour," Chopper spoke up. "Once he is, I'll page Dr. Polandina. He's our prosthetist and even made the captain's arm." The Paolum gestured to her. "Gold brass limb. We can talk over the details once your son is awake to hear them." Naza watched the group walk away, following Chopper while her tail swished lightly behind. It was never easy to tell people that their family was crippled, but at least he would live. And, after some time, be able to get his life back on track. That was the good part. Turning away, the brunette made her way to the stairs and back down to the pharmacy. She'd been down there working on some potions when she got the message about the man with the missing leg. Since she was a walking advertisement for the quality of Pietro's work, Naza felt it was her duty to be present when the family was told, if for no other reason than to show off the fact that they could absolutely make fully functional prosthetics without bankrupting the patients. Family or Familia? Hey, boss. Mao called out as she entered the labs. The green-haired girl didn't look up, instead choosing to continue staring intently at her own work. Your potions finished while you were gone, so I went ahead and bottled them. Naza sighed. Thanks, Mao. Ever since the hospital opened, she'd been swamped with paperwork, but thankfully she did still manage to find time to both practice medicine and improve her alchemy skills. Picking up a clipboard, she started looking over the inventory sheet contained on it. They were going to need to post a mission or two for monster drops soon, since quite a few of them were used in their recipes. Unfortunately, though, she didn't get very far into it before Hestia's voice cut her off. Captain, there's someone out here who wants to talk to you. Looking up, Naza saw the head of the young alchemist poking through the open door leading to the pharmacy storefront. Sighing, she stood up and walked out the door which led to behind the counter. Standing in front of it was a person, slim of form and of a similar height to Naza herself. They were covered from head to toe in a cloak with a hood drawn up to cover their hair and face. Can I help you? Naza asked, confused. The person looked around. There were many curious patrons wandering around the store, but none were close enough to actually see or hear anything. The figure hesitantly pulled up their hood just enough for Naza and Hestia, who stood behind the counter, to see their face. The Cianthrope's eyes went wide as she took in desperation in the woman's eyes. I need your help, Ermid whispered, dropping her hood back over her face. AIS. If AIS was honest with herself, she wasn't quite sure how she ended up here. When she'd gone to see Belle, it was supposed to be just another day hanging out with him to talk and train, but all these emotions got the better of her. She understood, thanks to a talk with Riveria and the teasing of the girls, that she had feelings for Belle. He was cute and he was nice, and she liked him. So, when she asked the girls what to do about it, she'd gotten very different answers. Tyon told her to drag him into a private room and do lots of very intimate things to him. But that conversation devolved into her detailing all the things she wanted Finn to do to her, and made AIS very uncomfortable, so her advice was definitely out. Tiona, on the other hand, told her she should fight Belle first and then drag him into a private room. AIS decided to outright ignore the opinions of the twins, though at least sparring with Belle was somewhat familiar. Lefia went on and on about going on a date, and all the things that were supposed to happen on it, but Riveria interrupted their talk before telling the elven girl to lay off the romance novels. It was her green-haired surrogate mother that had the most helpful advice. She told the blonde that all she really needed to do was spend time with Belle doing something they both enjoyed, and that, if it felt right, tell him how she felt. AIS supposed that was best, but coming up with things she enjoyed was difficult. She'd never done half the things that Lefia described, and she had no opinion one way or another on flowers, so she just went with dungeon diving. She liked doing that, and so did Belle, so if they went together, just the two of them, then that counted as a date. At least, that's how it sounded to her. So, down into the dungeon they went. It was fun too. She enjoyed being able to fight beside him, just the two of them. Even if none of the monsters above 18 were any danger to her and barely any danger to him, it was fun. Like those long walks Lefia was yapping about, but with more monsters to kill. Either way, she liked it. Now she was standing inside the town hall of Riviera on the 18th floor because Bors, the mayor, ambushed them right after they entered the town. I'll get right to the point and just ask the question. Do you know what day tomorrow is? The gruff one-eyed man asked, turning to face them and leaning against a desk. AIS glanced at Belle as he spoke. No. At least, I don't think tomorrow is very significant. Up on the surface, maybe not. Bors replied. Down here, it's big. Tomorrow's Goliath Day. Oh. Ari's eyes went wide as she understood. Tomorrow was the day Goliath respawned. She hadn't even considered that. Why, you mean Goliath will respawn on 17 tomorrow? Bell asked, a gleam in his eye. That's right. Bors replied. Usually, we can scrape up a crew to go get rid of it, but we're still a little short-handed. Some of our regular residents decided to stay up on the surface for a while after the evacuation. A few others wound up arrested. They were down here to avoid warrants and such and got caught. There's also the fact that not one adventurer in the town right now is above early level 3. My point is, taking out Goliath with just the Rivera crew would be pretty fucking difficult. On the other hand, if the two of you were there, we can easily take care of Goliath. AIS nodded her head in understanding. Don't worry about gathering a crew. I'll kill him myself tomorrow morning. She was level 6 and damn strong. Goliath didn't stand a chance against her, and it wasn't like he was the first monster Rex she'd killed solo, not to mention being far from the strongest. Bors sighed. Thanks, Wellenstein. As payment, I'll set you up in the best inn we have for the night. No charge. I appreciate it, she replied, glancing sidelong at Bell's contemplative expression. She couldn't tell what he was thinking, but she knew him well enough to know when he was deep in thought about something. Bors led them through the streets to villas rebuilt in so that he could explain that their rooms and food were on his dime before bidding them farewell and strolling off. Villy led them upstairs, but AIS didn't stay in her room for long. No, she simply set her bag down before crossing the hallway to knock on Bell's door. The white-haired man let her in without a word. Something's bothering you, AIS said once the door was closed. Turning, she faced the determined expression on her crush's face. What is it? AIS. Bell hesitated. Would you let me fight Goliath tomorrow? Alone? Her eyes went wide in shock and surprise. Naza. All right, Emid, start talking, Naza said, shutting the door to her office. Sitting in front of her desk, hood down, was Emid Tezene, captain of the Dien sect Familia. Thankfully, she'd been able to get a hold of both Shizun and Lord Mayak, so they were both in the office with her. The silver-haired human hesitated. I would like to request sanctuary with your Familia. Sanctuary? Naza asked, confused. You want us to protect you from Dien sect? Emid simply nodded. Asking us to hide you from your patron god is not something done lightly, young Tezene. Lord Mayak said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. What has Dien sect done? Emid sighed and hung her head. You're aware of the hot spring, yes? The one the Dien sect Familia is about to open. Yes. Naza grumbled. He announced it in our lobby after all. Ah, yes. She nodded. He's been telling the city that he found a natural hot spring, one with healing properties, and build the bathhouse on top of it. That's a lie. He what, Ms. Tezene? Shizun asked. Emid hung her head, refusing to meet their eyes. There is no spring. He wants to use my bathwater. I'm sorry, your bathwater. Naza blurted out, confused and a little disgusted. Emid sighed. One of my skills, Twidwell, allows me to produce a pool of holy water with extreme healing properties. A side effect we discovered is that most of the water produced inside my body has a similar but diluted effect. My sweat does have minor healing properties, so Lord Dien sect wants me to spend most of my time bathing in the source of the spring rather than attending my duties as a healer. The silver-haired girl's voice had only gotten angrier as the explanation went on. Not that Naza could blame her. That's revolting. Shizun muttered. No matter if it has healing properties, who would want to bathe in someone else's sweat? It is a little disturbing. Lord Mayak agreed. It's mortifying. Emid cried, putting her face in her hands. Lord Dien sect has only gotten more deranged since your Familia began to succeed. He doesn't care about healing people anymore. If I'm being honest, I don't think he ever did. All he cares about is money and putting the Mayak Familia back in what he thinks is your proper place. Now he wants me to sacrifice my work as a healer so that people can bathe in my sweat. I can't do it. I won't do it. It's all right, Emid. Naza sighed, putting a hand on her shoulder and squeezing lightly. Just one look at Mayaka's face told her that the silver-haired girl was telling the truth. You can stay here with us. We'll protect you. I don't just want protection. Ahmed barked out, still angry. I want out. I want to leave the Gen sect Familia and join this one. You're actually healing people here. Not just fleecing them for cash. I'm a doctor, but I can't remember the last time a patient came to see me willingly. Nobody wants to see a Gen sect healer anymore because they know they'll go bankrupt if they do. That's why I'm here, but he won't let me leave. The one time I brought it up to him, he had me locked in my room for a week. Lord Mayak sighed and rubbed his face. It's illegal to hold someone within a familiar against their will, but all gods are allowed to set their own conditions for when and how someone can leave. If the guild doesn't know someone is being held against their will, they won't do anything about it. It's part of why Apollo got away with his behavior for so long. He was coercing people to join his familia, true, but one could reason that they joined of their own free will. It's just that the alternative was usually far worse than joining. So how do we do this, then? Naza asked, wrapping her prosthetic further around Ahmed's shoulders. How do we get her out of the Dien sect familia? Lord Mayak sighed. There are two options. One is to challenge him to a war game and name Ahmed's transfer as our win condition. The only problem is, our familia aren't exactly fighters. The other way is to get the guild involved. The fact that Dien sect lied about the spring will help our case to prove his holding Ahmed illegally, but it means you will have to testify before both the guild and the Donatus Council, which will likely result in Dien sect challenging us to a war game anyway. I'm more than willing to testify. So, a war game is all but inevitable? Naza asked. More than likely, yes. Lord Mayak sighed in response. Naza looked down at Ahmed's hunched form, still rubbing her shoulders before looking back up at Lord Mayak with a determined glint in her eyes. Then it looks like we need to request a meeting with the guild head. Bell, are you sure you want to do this, Bell? AIS asked from beside him as they climbed the stairs to the 17th floor and Goliath's boss room. I'm certain, he replied, determination filling his voice. Goliath was considered a level 4 monster, which meant that most would consider fighting it alone a task for level 4 adventurers. While Bell was still level 3, he was high level 3, right on the border of 4. He could do it. Bell was certain of it. It was what he'd been considering in his office before AIS arrived. He hadn't exactly spoken to anybody about wanting to do this, but, well, if it worked, then he'd gladly accept whatever punishment they gave him. AIS nodded beside him. He'd expected her to protest his decision, but was rather pleasantly surprised to find her accepting it without much of a fuss. Considering she'd done something just a reckless when she fought Eudeus, Bell supposed she couldn't exactly judge him for wanting to solo Goliath. Together, they climbed the last of the stairs to the boss room. Peering in, he could see the glowing wall of grief, waiting and watching for someone to enter the arena. Okay. Bell sighed, shaking out his arms. Please don't interfere unless it looks like I'm going to die. You have my word. AIS replied, but then she hesitated. Bell turned to her. What is it? He asked. Nothing. She shook her head. Just worried, but I know you can do this. He gave her a smile and charged into the arena. Held in a good grip with his right hand was the Hestia knife, his primary weapon, his pride and joy. The blade forged specially for him by Master Torhen using Goddess Hestia's blood. In his left was the blade forged by Welf from the horn of the Minotaur he'd killed during his level up from 1 to 2. On his back, though, there was something else. A long, slender, katana style blade enchanted with flame and stamina drain effects. One of the issues he'd discovered during the battle on the 18th floor was that while he preferred daggers, they weren't always the best option when dealing with colossal opponents like Goliath, so he'd requested the katana from Welf in order to give himself an edge against enemies like the hulking brute. Usually, he kept it in his pack, but he knew he was going to want it for this fight, so he'd taken a moment to strap it to his back before charging in. The moment his feet hit the oddly colored stone floor of the boss room, cracks began to form in the wall of grief. Just like the time when they'd been forced to run through after the pass parade, the wall shattered like glass while the colossal form of Goliath pushed his way out. He was different than the black counterpart they'd faced during the battle of the 18th floor, but no less massive. Tan skin, eyeless, and with long black hair, he looked mostly like a colossal human. Bell ran, ducked, and jumped over the flying crystal boulders as he charged the colossal form of the monster. Goliath collapsed to the ground as he fell out of the wall, landing on his hands and knees, but he wasn't there for long. Lifting up, he sent a massive, sweeping hand, careening towards Bell. Despite the gargantuan size, Goliath was fast. Thankfully, speed was the white-haired captain's specialty. Bell ducked, sliding beneath the arm as he ran. He had a plan for this battle and would not be deterred. Springing back to his feet, Bell launched a firebolt directly at Goliath's face. It didn't do much, but the spell was enough to cause the Hulk to roar and lean back, away from the heat. As Bell neared Goliath's feet, the monster Rex lifted up and bruffed its right foot, screaming down. He tried to avoid the shockwave by ducking behind a crystal boulder, but it was too fast. The wave of air picked up the captain and sent him tumbling towards the shattered wall of grief. Bell gritted his teeth, ears ringing from the concussive air blast, and tried to right himself. But Goliath was faster. A huge hand came flying through the air and closed around his form. The world went dark as Goliath's colossal fist sealed itself around Bell's form and began to squeeze. Bell groaned in pain as the pressure intensified, forcing the air from his lungs. He wriggled, trying to break free, but there was no way he could overpower the monster trying to crush him to death. Bell grit his teeth and closed his eyes. His left hand lit up with fire as he released a firebolt directly into the hand holding him. He could feel his clothes and the skin of his leg and back burning from the explosive flash. But it did what he needed it to do. Goliath's hand loosened as the monster roared in pain. The flesh blackened and burned. Bell's armor was enchanted with fire resistance, but it wasn't enough to completely protect him. Still, he knew he couldn't afford to baby his own injuries. He needed to capitalize on the moment. Before Goliath could drop him, Bell sunk his daggers into the beast's hand. Repeating the trick he'd used against Black Goliath, he used the blades to scale his way up the arm, holding on for dear life while the Hulk tried to throw him off. The burns on his leg and back burned as he climbed, but Bell did his best to ignore them. Reaching Goliath's head, Bell sunk his Minotaur blade deep into the neck of the beast and did everything he could to tangle his legs in Goliath's long hair. He needed a good purchase for this. Reaching up, he drew his katana and began to charge his Argonaut ability. The blue light formed around the blade, and he could hear the bells begin to ring in his mind. Argonaut amplified the power of a single strike and required charging before it could be used. He could move, fight, and even cast spells while it charged, but if he used the weapon he was charging up during the process, then it would unleash the contained energy prematurely. He couldn't allow that, so there he sat, hanging on for dear life while Goliath charged around the room, trying to swat at him. Thankfully, he didn't need a full charge for this. A huge hand came up, Goliath intending to smack into the back of its own head and crush Bell in the process, but he was able to simply release his grip on the Minotaur dagger and hang by his legs, which remained tangled in the long dark hair of the beast. Goliath's hand smashed into its head, barely missing Bell and making it stumble, but it did not fall. Once he was ready, Bell untangled himself from the hair and dragged his way up it, sword glowing. Once he reached the top of Goliath's head, he jumped. With a roar of defiance, Bell brought the blade down directly into the skull of the beast and let gravity do the rest. The blade, powered by Argonaut and driven by the very earth pulling against Bell's weight, carved a furrow that bisected the Goliath vertically in half. Bell landed hard on the floor, his legs and back crumpling under the impact as Goliath shattered into dust. He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. He'd done it. He was bruised and pretty badly burned, but he'd done it. He'd killed Goliath. He'd slain a monster. Rex Solo. Bell turned his head towards the sounds of footsteps as AIS ran up to him, pulling potions out of her bag as she did. The blonde beauty skidded on her knees next to him, eyes wide with relief as she took in his own open and gleaming eyes. "I did it," Bell whispered, the effort causing no small discomfort from his bruised and possibly cracked ribs. "You did it," AIS whispered back, leaning over him and pulling his head into her lap. To Bell's immense shock, the next thing she did was lean down and press her lips to his. "AON, done. Woo." So, Bell kills Goliath solo and AIS takes a big step. Then we have Ermid seeking sanctuary with the Mayak Familia. What do you all think? Was that enough for a level up? Will there be a war game between Mayak and Dien's sect? If there is, What will it look like? Please let me know your thoughts and opinions. Oh, and for those who read my other story, A Digital Mother, I'll try and get the chapter out today, but it might be a day or two late. Answers to questions. On FFN. Monkey D. Conan, I'm glad you liked it. I am considering putting in moments with other people reacting to different romances, but I'm not sure how many or how central they'll be. Walkman Apprentice Wordsmith. So, you guessed right. Hope you liked it. Frostwolf 3227. No babies just yet, I'm afraid, but maybe one day. I am considering doing the village episode, but I have to figure out how to incorporate it, so we will see what happens. Erebus 13. Thank you. As for the issue with Aisha, that was just a blunder on my part. I'd forgotten I changed her level and didn't have my notes with me when I wrote that segment. Archangel Zyrian Chaos God. Not exactly calm, but a bit of a fluffy ending here too. Guest, I'll consider a cameo or two, but they won't be there for any major plot point. Tempson, they will once they find out. Kavu Tribal EDH, I do have an ending in mind, and there are a few arcs to cover before I end it. I just needed some time to really be sure what to do next and how to handle it. Lion Lord Iskana, thank you. KU97, she did. I just forgot when I wrote that bit. Blue Assassin 996, probably next chapter. Swift Calliston, she is. Tom 12200, she did. I fixed the error in chapter 48. Virus ZYX, hope you enjoyed it. On AO3. Phoenix _warehouse _productions, adopting a kid is probably out, but I'm not against introducing the orphanage. As for Katrina, I may mention her, but it won't be a big thing. The Britato patch, glad you liked it. 07 Creeper 236, glad you liked it. Reincarnation, thank you. There was a bit of danger, but it wasn't too bad. Even they don't attract world-ending chaos every time they are alone. Magnus Thread, Daphne x Cassandra is confirmed canon already. Haroheim x Mikoto. Probably won't happen though, sadly, but we are getting progress on the Airmid X NASA front. I probably won't be adding any more reference characters for a while. Though. Christina, thank you. Criffmaster 27. That would certainly be amusing. Alex 3773. We will see that probably in the next chapter. Cledif, Dungeon Date, and of course Arcos is happy. I refuse to not give them a happy ending. Big Time 12. Torhen joined the Imperials during the Civil War because he would never even consider working for Ulfric. Torhen was raised by the Dark Brotherhood. Gabriella was literally his mother in all ways except biological, so why would he be okay with serving Ulfric when the dude is supremely racist against Torhen's mom? He would 100% refuse to work with the guy who'd want to force his mom to live in a slum. Just because she's a Dunmer and Ulfric's all but hurt about anybody who's not a Nord. Also, later in life he's a big believer in the philosophy of the Greybirds, so he'd take offense at Ulfric using a shout to beat Torig. Chapter 50. AON, here we go. Chapter 50. It's honestly hard to believe I've made it this far and I have all you readers to thank for it. I'll be honest, the muse has been harder to find recently, and it's all of you that have kept me going, kept me writing. I still enjoy it, or I wouldn't be doing it, but as life gets more complicated, the motivation to write has been harder to find. You all are the reason I keep doing it, so thank you all so very much for your comments and support as I write this story. I know that the chapters haven't been as frequent as we all would like, and that the story has gone in different directions than some of you wanted, but you're still here, still reading every chapter one post, and it really does mean so much to me. I started this story with zero expectations. I'd never written anything before and fully expected this to be hated. To see it now, with just under 300,000 words and 50 chapters, is mind-blowing. The idea that my story is so popular on both FFN and AO3 is absolutely nuts. Thank you all so very much for your support. I promise I will do everything I can to keep writing and to finish this story in a satisfying way. Also, shout out to Frank T. Haddock for making a TV tropes page for this story. That's incredible. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you all so much for your support. I hope you will continue to leave comments and reviews on this story as I bring out more chapters for you to enjoy. Hearthfire. Chapter 50. Torhen. Torhen stood to the side, eyeing the training yard with a wary gaze. To one side stood Pyrrha, Mare, Leo, Pippin, and Jorn, while on the other were Rodericka, Aura, and Haroheim. These three were far from alone. standing proudly in front of the young Cianthrope, was her summoned knight. Its ethereal blue form shimmered in the sunlight, drawing attention to the naked blades of its sword and crescent scythe. To their left was Aura's own summon. The huge bear-like creature snarled, tensing its translucent muscles. Lastly, there was the new addition. Floating a few inches above the ground in front of Heraheim was a feminine figure comprised entirely of condensed flames and black armor. A flame Etronac, summoned by the young Renard courtesy of a conjuration spellbook. Taj! The Hume Bunny shouted, dashing towards his opponents, shield held out before him. Sprinting forward, he kept the shield raised defensively in front of himself. Following behind and using Jorn as cover, Leo and Pippin both charged. Leo, the werewolf, preferred a longsword while Pippin, the Pal-Lum, used a greatsword. Or, at least, what was considered a greatsword for a Pal-Lum. Mare remained behind, intending to participate in the battle from the back as ranged support while Pyrrha split off, maneuvering around the battlefield to the right. With a heave, she hurled her spear directly at Aura's bear. The weapon glanced off the creature's ethereal armor, spinning through the air. Suddenly, the weapon stopped dead before hurtling back towards its owner thanks to the redhead's unique skill. Magnetize. Essentially, it allowed her to freely control any metal object she'd come into contact with within a set period of time, an ability she freely used to recall her weapon into her hand as she charged. With a roar and a command from its master, the summoned creature began a lumbering charge across the field towards the redhead. Aura leapt up, landing on the back of her summon. In her hand, she held a shock-enchanted whip courtesy of Welf tipped with a stinging barb. Before she could swing her whip, the dark elf was forced to duck with a yelp as a lightning bolt sailed over her head, courtesy of her own brother. As the bear charged, Heraheim's flame Etronac gestured with a hand, sending a bolt of fire directly at the charging threat in front of it. Jorn ducked his head and braced himself, letting the bolt crash and dissipate against his shield. A second blast, courtesy of the Renard, controlling the Etronac, stopped the charging adventurer dead in his tracks for a moment. Pushing forward again, steam rising from his shield, Jorn took a swing at the Etronac only to be forced to backpedal away from the spinning staff of the conjurer. Twirling her staff in her hands, Heraheim took another swipe at his legs. With a yelp, Jorn leapt over the attack, catching a second blow from the Etronac on his shield. Behind him, Leo and Pippin split off, charging towards the ethereal knight. The two clashed against it, blades sparking against its translucent armor. Behind her summon, Roderica took what shots she could, sending out blasts of cold through her frost spell. Of the three on her team, she was the most timid when it came to participating in direct combat. "How's it going, Teach?" Daphne's voice asked from behind him. Turning, Torhen examined the girl. Dressed in her dark armor, silver blade at her side, she carried herself with an easy confidence that was absent during their first interactions. Both she and Cassandra went through their days with lighter footsteps and easy smiles ever since Apollo was defeated and they were freed from his clutches. Past Daphne, Torhen could see Cassandra and the second team of Hestia Familia level 1s. They'd spent the last few hours in the dungeon with the two former members of the Apollo, Familia having volunteered to act as their backup chaperones. It was nice to see them stepping up and taking a mentorship role for their less experienced members. "They are doing well," Torhen replied, looking back to the battle. "What about your group? How did they fare inside the dungeon?" "Pretty good, all things considered," the redhead admitted, glancing back to her group. "They made it all the way to level 8 before we had to intervene. Though, that's partially because they went in with such a big group. If they were on their own or in a smaller team, I doubt any of them would have made it past 6. They are improving," Torhen said with a smile. "That is all that matters." Turning away from him, Daphne looked over towards the manor. "Think it's safe to go in yet?" she asked. Torhen scoffed. "You'll be fine. Hestia calmed down hours ago." He was speaking, of course, about the lecture of epic proportions that followed Bel's return from the dungeon the night before. While the Dragonborn was proud of his protégé's skills, he was less than impressed with the recklessness of his actions. Fighting a floor boss alone, even with the safety net of AIS, was not a decision to be made lightly, especially when you didn't tell anybody in your Familia that you were even thinking of doing it. I still can't believe he made it to level 4 so fast. Daphne muttered. I mean, we're all improving faster since we started training with you, but Belle's progress is still off the charts. Torhen, of course, knew why Belle was improving so quickly, but he wasn't about to explain it to Daphne. No, that was a secret reserved only for him and Hestia. If Torhen had his way, Belle would never find out, because the second he did, the chances of his progression skill ceasing to work went up exponentially. That's how emotion-driven skills worked. The less the wielder knew about them, the better. Did you see any of the others in the dungeon? He asked, diverting the subject away. Hey. Oh, yeah, we did. Daphne replied. Lily's trying a solo run through the middle floors, and passed us on her way down a few hours ago. Uka and his team came down with us, but they went on ahead after we hit the 5th floor. They are planning to head down to 18 now that Goliath is out of the way. I think Urza's team is doing the same thing, but I haven't seen them. They are. Torhen nodded. They left about an hour after you did, so that they wouldn't have to compete with Uka's group for monster drops. What about Alexio's team? They are taking a day off from training. I believe the Hasagawas are off in the city somewhere, and Jackie is visiting his old familia on the Upper East Side. Alexios and Aisha have been locked in her room most of the day. I doubt I need to elaborate on what they have likely been doing. Daphne shook her head with a smirk before glancing at Cassandra, who was still speaking with the younger adventurers. The romantic bond between the two was a well-established fact, but it was rare for anyone to catch them being anything more than mildly affectionate in public. Welf. So, these rings will really let you breathe underwater? A dark-haired sheepman asked, peering at the display case. That's right, sir. Paula replied cheerfully. They are guaranteed to work. Even the Loki Familia's best members swear by these. I've even heard that the sword princess herself never even takes hers off. So long as you don't remove the ring, you'll never have to worry about drowning ever again. The customer hummed, hemming and hawing over the decision. Ever since Welf started producing and selling water-breathing enchantments, they'd become popular with level 3 and 4 adventurers, the ones who were most likely to be either struggling with or tackling the Water City region of the dungeon that covered the 25th to 27th floors for the first time. The redhead hadn't been down there yet himself, but they were planning an expedition. Soon enough, Welf leaned back, letting his gaze wander away from the interaction at the counter to the rest of his shop. While not packed, since it wasn't a particularly popular time of day, the flow of customers could only be described as steady. On an average day, the shop didn't go more than half an hour, even at its slowest times, without someone at the counter looking to either buy something or commission a custom piece. In other words, business was booming. Sure, it meant that Welf was super busy making stuff, but by the time they'd actually reached this point, he'd gotten making the most popular items down to a science. The water-breathing rings, for example, were easy to make. If he really pushed himself, he could probably make around 50 or so of them in about 2 hours. More than enough to get them through a few weeks of sales. In fact, enchanted jewelry made up a good 50% of his overall sales. Wearing a simple ring or necklace that lets you resist fire, breathe under water, or even just regain your stamina faster was an advantage that few adventurers could pass up. Other things like boots, gloves, or enchanted weapons were far less uniform in their make, and were what really let him stretch his skills as a smith and enchanter. It wasn't possible for two people to walk into his shop and leave again with identical weapons, because Welf refused to make two pieces identical to each other unless they were going to be sold as part of a full set. Speaking of sets, he'd been getting quite a few commissions for enchanted armor recently, whether that be enchanting existing sets or making them from scratch himself. The ones he'd given priority to were the armor and weapons for his new Familia members, but quickly following those were the sets for the Loki Familia and then, begrudgingly, the Freya Familia. Not that there were many of those just yet. Lastly on the priority list were the ones coming from his shop, but no matter how high on the list they fell, the redhead gave his all in, producing every single one of his pieces. He refused to let his name be associated with any weapon or suit of armor that failed its bearer. It went against everything he stood for. Needless to say, he spent most of his time these days either in his shop or working in the forge. He still sparred with the rest of the Familia during morning training, but on average, he only found time to actually dungeon dive about once a week. Hell, he hadn't been back to 18 since the first time they went down just before they recruited all the new people. Speaking of, it was a point of great pride for him that all of a sudden, an entire Familia was decked out in armor he'd made. Sure, Torhen made stuff for Aisha and Ryu, but that was just an exception. Plus, Torhen was his teacher, so he wasn't exactly about to complain. Not when joining the Hestia Familia had made him so much happier than he'd been as a member of the Hephaestus Familia. Frankly, the fact that he didn't get to see the beautiful goddess of the forge every day was the only downside. Still, he got to see her enough, and he knew he'd return to her one day, when he could stand beside her as a smith of equal skill and finally tell her how he felt. He'd return to her Familia. Yo, boss. Batson, the young dwarf who helped Paula look over the shop on a daily basis, called out. Following along behind him was a stout dwarven woman with dirty blonde hair. "What's up, Batson?" Welf asked, setting down the battle axe he'd been polishing, absent-mindedly as he watched the shop. "This fine lady would like to commission some armor," the dwarf boy said, gesturing to the other dwarf. The dwarf introduced herself, bowing her head in greeting. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir." "Pleasure's all mine," Welf replied, shaking the woman's hand. "Has Batson shown you the catalog yet?" "Hadn't got that far yet, boss." Batson cut in. "Well then let's take a look." Welf reached over and pulled out a copy of the armor and enchantment catalog. One section held sketches and designs for various armor types, while the other contained a list of possible enchantments for each piece of the armor set as well as the price. "Are you looking for light, medium, or heavy armor?" "Heavy armor," the dwarf woman replied. "I serve as the frontline tank for my party, so strong armor and a good shield are a must for me." "Heavy. All right then." Welf flipped quickly through, stopping on the heavy armor section. "These sketches are of various designs and types of heavy armor I've been tinkering with. Feel free to peruse and choose or even make suggestions. Any commission set I make will be done exactly to your specifications, so feel free to make changes or requests." The dwarven girl took several minutes to peruse the catalog before finally selecting a design he'd been tinkering with based on cyrodiilic steel armor. They spent the next hour or so going back and forth on the enchantments she wanted and how much they'd cost or what discounts he could swing if she provided him with the materials he needed to complete the enchantments. All in all, it was a very productive and profitable meeting. "Naza, are you sure you're ready for this?" Naza asked the disguised silver-haired girl. "We can probably handle this part without you, if you'd rather not." "I can do this, Naza," Ermid whispered, her face covered by her hood as the pair walked along behind Lord Myak. They were taking the back streets as they made their way towards the guild building, all the better to ensure they weren't spotted. Ermid's voice was confident, but there was still a slight shake to it as she still slipped her hand into Naza's flesh one. The Cianthrope chose not to acknowledge the contact aside from giving the hand a reassuring squeeze. It didn't take their group long to reach the guild building. Slipping inside, they moved quickly towards the counter. It was a fairly dead time of day, so there weren't many adventurers loitering around inside. Looking around, Naza couldn't see Aina or any other receptionist she recognized. Following along, she kept pace with her lord as he approached the counter. "Greetings, my lord," the receptionist said, recognizing the divinity in her patron even if she didn't know precisely which god he was. "What can I do for you today?" "I was hoping to speak with the guild head, if he's available," her lord replied. "I'm afraid it's a rather sensitive topic. Could you send him a message for me? Tell him that Myak is here to speak with him and hand him this letter." Pulling out a plain white envelope, Myak placed it on the desk in front of the girl. There wasn't much in it, just a few words implying that the Myak Familia were involved in a sanctuary situation. Taking the envelope, the girl bowed her head before moving away towards the stairs. The three stood there in silence. Each time someone entered the building, Ermid would shuffle just slightly further behind Naza and Myak, using their bodies to hide her form, just in case anybody recognized her. They couldn't afford rumors spreading about how the captain of the Dien sect Familia was seen talking with the god and captain of their primary rival. Not until they were ready to lay their accusations at Dien sect's feet. It wasn't long before the receptionist returned and gestured for them to follow. Walking along Behind her towards the stairs, Naza kept to the back of the group, ensuring that Ermid was between herself and Mayak the whole time. Soon enough, they reached the door to Royman Mardil's office. Opening the door for them, the receptionist let them inside before bowing her head to Royman and Lord Mayak and shutting the door behind her. Lord Mayak. Royman bowed, his head in greeting to the god. Welcome to the guild hall. I thank you, Master Mardil. Her lord replied, nodding his head. Both for your welcome, and for meeting with me on such short notice. I wish I was here under less dire circumstances, but unfortunately circumstances have forced my hand. Ah, yes. The guild head nodded, sitting back down and gesturing for the rest of them to take their own seats in front of the desk. Your note implied that an adventurer had come to you requesting sanctuary. I'm sure you're aware of how serious a situation that is, so please, tell me all you can. What happened? Lord Mayak didn't speak. He simply turned to look at Ermid. Naza grimaced and put a reassuring hand on the human girl's shoulder. Hesitantly at first, but then with force and confidence, the silver-haired doctor threw back her hood and revealed her face. Oh, bugger. The overweight elf muttered in shock. My name is Ermid Tezene, she said, her voice strong but wavering. I am here to declare that I have requested sanctuary with the Mayak Familia. Furthermore, I am here to accuse my lord, Dien Sect, of false imprisonment, blackmail, false advertising, coercion, and fraud. Royman just sat there for a few moments in silence before hanging his head in defeat. You are aware of how serious those accusations are, right? His resigned voice asked. What? They'll mean once they get out. We are aware that this will likely lead to a war game and possibly a trial for Dien Sect. Master Mardil. Lord Mayak replied. It is our intention to reveal these accusations at tomorrow's emergency Donatus meeting. We simply thought it best to meet with you first, not only to give you a heads up but also to present what evidence we have ahead of time. The guild head sighed. Well, I suppose a warning of chaos before it occurs is appreciated at the very least. Let's get it over with, I suppose. He pulled out a pad of paper and a pen. Miss Tezene, let's begin with taking your statement. Start from the beginning and tell me everything you can about what led you to making this decision. Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home, restaurateur, businesswoman, and mistress of the Hestia Familia rubbed her tired eyes and leaned back in her seat. All around her, the gods were gathering for an emergency Donatus council, something that did not happen often, normally, but had become a rather common occurrence in recent months. The meeting after Monsterphilia, after the disaster on the 18th floor, after Ishtar died, even the gathering for the war game, which didn't technically count, but it was basically a Donatus meeting. It seemed as though the world kept giving them reasons to meet like this. Now it was ours turn to cause a commotion. The army of Rakia was on the march, and it would only be a matter of time before they arrived. Rumors of such things were prevalent across the city, but no official statement had been made. That was the entire purpose of calling the emergency council. Normally, the Donatus Council only meet once a quarter, and their primary purpose was to create aliases for adventurers who'd ranked up between meetings. It was only during emergency councils that they actually bothered with policy decisions, despite the fact that the Donatus Council was technically a branch of Orario's government. The day-to-day operations of the city were handled quite easily by the Guild for bureaucratic or civil matters and by the Ganesha Familia when it came to security or policing matters. Uranus was ultimately in charge of the city, so it was rare that the council met for any substantial reason. In truth, the Donatus Council could only make decisions regarding other gods. It was the branch of the Orarian government that oversaw the behavior of the gods themselves. The gods descended to the lower world in search of entertainment, but after Orario was formed, it became clear that they needed more rules besides just don't use your godly powers. If they wanted to form a functioning society, Uranus was far too busy with his prayers and keeping the dungeon content to actively police the behavior of the gods, and the gods themselves refused to allow themselves to be placed below a mortal-led organization like the Guild in the governmental hierarchy. So, they created the Donatus Council. The Guild, of course, did have power over the gods insofar as they were the ones who were in charge of the dungeon and the ones that doled out assignments, punishments, and censure of various familia, but they had little control over the actual gods themselves. No, that was entirely up to the council, and since the gods didn't like being told what to do, the Donatus rarely exercised that particular power and just stuck to naming adventurers. This was one situation where they sadly had to discuss actually doing something about a fellow deity. 2. Actually given what Mayak had warned her about before they came in. The Rakan invasions were little more than a joke, all things considered. Every few years, Oz would lead an army towards Orario where they would be easily trounced and pushed back by the mightiest adventurers of the city, and Oz himself would be sent running back to Rakia with his tail between his legs. While there was zero risk to the safety of the citizens coming from the actual invasion, having an army at your doorstep was a major problem for trade. The supply lines in and out of the city were always disrupted during these pathetic attempts at conquest, meaning that for anyone who dealt in trade, these invasions were more than just a slightly annoying distraction. I am Ganesha. The voice of the flamboyant god shouted from the center of the room as he entered. Looking around, Hestia could see that almost everyone had arrived, so they'd be starting soon. Yo, Hestia. Loki waved, plopping down in a seat next to her. She leered a bit at Hestia's body like she usually did, but the goddess of the heart didn't mind. After having spent so much time in Loki's company in recent months, she was used to it. Maybe she enjoyed it a bit, and puffed out her chest by stretching her arms behind her back, but if she did that on purpose, nobody would ever know. Hey, Loki, she replied, still stretching and still ignoring the redhead's peering eyes. Did Mayak get a chance to talk to you? Mayak? The other goddess asked, distractedly. Nah, haven't seen him yet. What's up? You'll see. Hestia smirked at her, dropping her arms to her side and leaning back. Hell, you'll probably enjoy the chaos that'll follow what he has planned. Loki's eyes perked up, finally looking her fellow goddess in the face. There's gonna be chaos. Or, hesitate, you give me the nicest surprises. She cackled, eyes sparkling with mischievous delight. I am Ganesha. Ganesha shouted from the center stage. All right, everyone. Let's settle down and get started. Hummies too shouted, joining the other god in the middle. Technically, he was still on house arrest, but he was allowed out for godly meetings and to lead the council. Mostly because he was the only one willing to actually start and lead meetings other than Ganesha, and nobody wanted Ganesha to be in charge. We're here today to discuss the coming invasion by Rakia and the Ars Familia. Most of our plans are already finalized, so this is just our chance to let everyone know what's happening. Hummies cleared his throat. Firstly, as I'm sure you're all aware, these invasions tend to have a detrimental effect on our economy. In order to combat this, the guild has asked that Hephaestus take control of the supply lines and make sure that they aren't disrupted too badly by the army that's marching towards us. How long is this invasion going to last? Nanabojo asked from near the back of the seating. Last time it took almost 2 weeks for Oz to give up. That actually leads me to my second point. Hummies said, the guild has commissioned the Loki, Freya, and Hestia familiars to repel the invasion. Mutters filled the air, but there wasn't much surprise to be found. Everybody knew that the guild would ask the strongest familiars to participate. They are just as interested as we are in keeping this a short and unobtrusive affair. To that end, they've requested that our defending forces try and end this invasion with just one decisive engagement. Push the enemy back to their camp and capture them all in one fell swoop rather than letting them run. There's just one small problem with the plan, though, and that's what the guild has asked us to decide. What do we do with us once we capture him? Even louder muttering filled the room. What do you mean? What do we do with him? Maliki asked from her seat in the middle. Rose, you can't seriously be suggesting that we sent him back to heaven, can you? I didn't say any such thing. Hummies shouted back. I'm just saying, this is the perfect opportunity to take him down a peg. You can't say he doesn't deserve it. Hummies has a good point. Hestia spoke up. Ours has been a pain in all our collective sides for decades, yet he's never been given anything but a slap on the wrist. To us, he's a mere annoyance, but to our children he's a tyrannical monster. How many of you have elves in your familia? She looked around, knowing full well that the vast majority of familia had at least one person with elven blood in their ranks. How many times have you heard the stories of the elven forests and what happened to them under Oz orders? I myself have a pair of elf sisters whose grandfather was killed by Rakan soldiers. Not only that, but I have 2 others, who fled to the city specifically to escape conscription into ours armies. Hestia's right, Loki said from beside her. He might not have a chance in hell of winning, but ours is still technically the leader of a foreign power invading our nation. It might be an amusing or maybe slightly annoying diversion to us, but some of our kids are straight up traumatized because of his wars. Not just against us, but all of the lands surrounding Rakia. The ones that don't have overpowered adventurers defending their borders. Perhaps you're right. Freya mused. His actions are those of a child throwing a tantrum to us, but this is a good opportunity to curb that behavior. Ours could do with being humbled. Ironic, coming from a goddess who herself was so recently given a taste of humility, but Hestia couldn't exactly argue with the sentiment. The debate over what to do with ours raged on for nearly an hour before they ultimately agreed to table the discussion until after he was captured. The army was still a week's march away, so there was plenty of time for the gods to come up with ideas on what to do with him. Once they had him. All right. Hummies called out. Unless anyone has anything else they need to bring up, I think we're done for the day. Here it comes. Hestia whispered to Loki, who giggled under her breath. I'm afraid I do have something I wish to address. Mayak said, his voice even and calm. Mayak. Hermes shot him a confused glance but ultimately relented. Of course. The floor is yours. My fellow deities. Mayak said, I am truly sorry to take up more of your time, but I'm afraid I have no choice. You see, a few days ago a young woman came to see me. A young adventurer came to my hospital and requested the one thing I'd never hoped to hear from anyone. She requested sanctuary. Oh shit. Loki muttered lowly, eyes wide as shocked muttering filled the air. For a mortal to request sanctuary from a god other than their own was a rare and terrible thing. It meant that the child literally feared for their safety if they remained with their familia, and that was an immediate black mark against the reputation of the god in charge of said familia. In accordance with her wishes, Mayak continued, I am here to explain the reason why. You see, this young adventurer came to me not only to request sanctuary but to give testimony against her god. It would seem that she petitioned him for permission to leave his familia and even followed the guidelines he'd established for such, and yet when the time came, her god chose to imprison her and only let her out when she agreed never to speak of leaving his familia again. Some in the chamber who believed in treating their children with fairness and compassion hissed in anger, while a few of the more questionable ones started to look a little nervous. What is more, she revealed a great deal about her god's recent plans, not least of which is fact that he has been lying to the guild and the city for months. Quit pussyfooting around. Atha shouted. Just tell us who you're talking about. Very well. Mayak bowed his head. The adventurer in question is one Ermid Tezene. Gasps of astonishment filled the chamber, accompanied by Loki's barely successful attempts to muffle her cackling, and it is on her behalf that I accuse Dien's sect of blackmail, coercion, fraud, and false imprisonment. Your own captain has fled your familia and sought sanctuary with mine. This last bit was aimed directly at Dien's sect, who'd slowly been turning an unhealthy-looking shade of purple. You lying sack of shit. The pompous, overly dressed buffoon stood up and shouted, I will not stand here and be slandered like this. Ermid has been missing for days, and it's clear now that you've kidnapped her, you pathetic worm. Seriously. Hestia whispered to Loki, whose hand was covering her own mouth to try and stop the laughter. That's the best he can come up with. I'm afraid you're wrong again, Dien's sect. Mayak said. You see, only yesterday I accompanied Ermid to the guild, where she recounted her tale to the guild head and his investigators. They've already been given ample evidence to prove your guilt, and the young Tezene is more than willing to testify before this council so that we might all hear the truth. In her words, I urge you to stand down, Dien's sect, and accept the judgment of the guild and this council. I will do no such thing. The oaf shouted. I refuse to be slandered by an upstart who refuses to know his place. I will not listen to the lies of an insipid girl too stupid to understand what's actually important. I challenge you, Mayak, and when I crush you, I will take everything you hold dear and burn it to the ground in front of your eyes. I see. Mayak sighed. So, it's to be a war game, then? Yes. I challenge you to a war game. Dien's sect replied. This would be all for this story. Next story coming soon.